I was halfway through reviewing hospital budget reports when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. The man on the other end introduced himself as Sam Walker, owner of Golden Gate Pawn and Jewelry. My breath caught as he explained that my father's Rolex had just come through his shop. The same Rolex I thought was buried with Dad 3 months ago. Sam's voice dropped to a concerned whisper. "Miss Dana, there's something inside this watch you need to see. Today, if possible." My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. Mom and Howard must have stolen it from Dad's personal effects before the funeral. I grabbed my purse and jacket, mumbling a hurried explanation to my coworker Jill about a family emergency. My mind raced faster than my feet could carry me to the parking garage. The watch. Dad's precious Rolex Datejust. The one possession he valued above almost everything else. Dad James William Parker had raised me largely on his own after my parents divorced when I was 10 years old. Mom decided that being married to a watchmaker and jewelry repair specialist wasn't the life she had envisioned. She wanted more money, more prestige, more everything. So she left, and it was just Dad and me for most of my formative years. I spent countless afternoons after school in his small shop in downtown Seattle, watching his steady hands work magic on timepieces that others had given up on. "Watches are like little heartbeats, Dana," he would say, his magnifying loupe fixed to one eye. "Treat them with respect, and they'll be faithful to you forever." His shop wasn't fancy, but it had a loyal clientele who appreciated true craftsmanship. The walls were lined with clocks of all varieties, their synchronized ticking creating a soothing backdrop to our conversations about school life and my dreams for the future. The Rolex came into his possession after his first major success, saving an antique grandfather clock belonging to a local real estate magnate. The client was so impressed that he not only paid triple the asking price, but also referred several wealthy friends to my father's shop. With the unexpected windfall, Dad bought himself the one luxury he'd always admired, a Rolex Datejust with a blue dial. "This watch represents what's possible when you dedicate yourself to your craft," he told me on the day he brought it home. "And someday, it'll be yours, a reminder that I'm always with you, even when I'm gone." I never expected gone to come so soon. Just 3 months ago, at the age of 62, Dad suffered a massive heart attack in his shop. By the time a customer found him, it was too late. The doctors said it was sudden and likely painless small comfort as I planned his funeral alone. Mom and her new husband Howard attended, of course. Howard Blackwell was everything my father wasn't: loud, flashy, and obsessed with status. He'd made his fortune in commercial real estate and had married my mother 5 years ago. With Howard came his son Tyler, my stepbrother, a 30-year-old entrepreneur who had never held a job for more than 6 months, but always had a new groundbreaking business idea. The day before the funeral, I went to the funeral home for the final viewing. I had carefully selected Dad's favorite navy suit, his polished dress shoes, and most importantly, his beloved Rolex to be buried with him. The watch was his most treasured possession, and I knew he would want it with him. But when I arrived, the watch was gone. When I frantically asked the funeral director where it was, he seemed confused. "Your mother took it yesterday," he explained. "Said there was a change of plans." I immediately called Mom, who answered with practiced casualness. "Oh, Dana, your father had so many medical bills. We sold the watch to help cover them. Howard arranged it all. It's what your father would have wanted." I was stunned into silence. Dad had excellent health insurance through his business. He was meticulous about his finances. It made no sense, but in my grief I couldn't muster the strength to fight. That is, until yesterday. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media when a photo stopped me cold. It was Tyler grinning smugly at the launch party for his latest venture, some app that supposedly revolutionized grocery shopping. And there, peeking out from under his designer shirt cuff, was what looked exactly like Dad's distinctive Rolex. I zoomed in, heart pounding. The blue dial, the fluted bezel, even the tiny scratch on the bracelet from when Dad had caught it on a workbench years ago. It was his watch, I was sure of it. And now, less than 24 hours later, I had received this call from a pawnbroker. Somehow Dad's watch had gone from Tyler's wrist to a pawnshop. What had they done? I drove across town through midday traffic, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Golden Gate Pawn and Jewelry wasn't what I expected. Located in a renovated Victorian building, it looked more like an upscale antique store than the seedy pawn shops portrayed in movies. A bell chimed softly as I pushed open the door. Display cases lined the walls filled with jewelry coins and watches that glimmered under careful lighting. A tall man with salt and pepper hair glanced up from behind the counter. "Miss Parker," he asked, setting aside the loupe he'd been using. "Dana," I confirmed, approaching cautiously. "Are you Sam?" He nodded and extended his hand. "Sam Walker, thank you for coming so quickly." His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but serious. He motioned for me to follow him to a small office at the back of the shop, closing the door behind us. "I've been in this business 20 years, Sam began, settling behind a desk cluttered with watch parts and tools. "Before that, I was a watchmaker like your father." I blinked in surprise. "You knew my dad." "We weren't close, but watchmaking is a small community in Seattle. James Parker had a reputation for exceptional work." Sam opened a drawer and withdrew a familiar blue box. "Which is why I recognized this immediately." My heart jumped as he placed my father's Rolex on the desk between us. The sight of it, the watch I thought I'd never see again, brought tears to my eyes. "A young man brought it in yesterday," Sam continued. "Paid cash for a $15,000 loan. Said he'd be back to redeem it in a month." "Tyler," I whispered. "My stepbrother." Sam nodded. He fit that description. Well-dressed, bit of an attitude. Said he inherited it from an uncle. He frowned. "I knew it wasn't true, but that alone wouldn't have stopped me from taking it. Pawnshops deal with complicated situations all the time." "So why did you call me?" I asked, resisting the urge to snatch up the watch. Sam picked up the Rolex carefully. "Because of what I found when I examined it." With practiced movements, he turned the watch over and did something I couldn't quite follow with his thumbs against the case back. To my astonishment, a hidden panel I never knew existed popped open. "Your father modified this watch," Sam explained. "Created a secret compartment. It's extraordinary work I'd never have noticed if I hadn't been looking for authenticity markers." From the compartment, he extracted a tiny microdrive and a folded piece of paper. My hand trembled as I accepted them. The note was in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Asterisk. "Dana, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Everything you need to know is on the drive. Be careful who you trust. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Love always. Dad, asterisk." The date at the bottom was just 3 days before his death. "Oh my God," I whispered, the implications washing over me in a sickening wave. He knew something was wrong. He was trying to tell me. Sam watched me with compassion. "Miss Parker, I don't know what's on that drive, but your father went to extraordinary lengths to hide it. Whatever it is, he wanted you to find it." I looked up at him, suddenly desperate. "I need to take this watch. It's rightfully mine. My father wanted me to have it." Sam sighed. "I understand, but I have legal obligations. The young man has a pawn ticket for $15,000. If you want to claim the watch now, you'll need to cover that amount." My heart sank. I didn't have $15,000 readily available. Not even close. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Technically, he has 30 days before I can sell it, but..." Sam hesitated. "If he realizes what's inside, he might come back sooner. I can hold it for 72 hours as a professional courtesy. But that's it." I nodded, mind racing. "Thank you. I'll find a way to get the money." Sam carefully handed me the microdrive. "This is yours, though, and if there's anything else I can do." As I left the shop, the microdrive felt impossibly heavy in my pocket. My father had hidden something so important that he'd modified his precious watch to conceal it. And somehow I suspected it was connected to his sudden death. My apartment felt different when I returned, smaller, less safe. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The microdrive was so tiny in my palm, barely larger than my thumbnail. What secrets did it hold? When I plugged it in, a folder appeared containing dozens of files, spreadsheets, PDFs, photographs, and a video file simply titled Dana. With shaking fingers, I clicked on it first. My father's face filled the screen and I gasped. He looked tired, worried, nothing like the confident man I remembered. He was sitting in his office at the back of his shop, the wall of vintage clocks visible behind him. "Dana," he began, his voice steady, despite the concern in his eyes. "I hope you never have to watch this, but if you're seeing this now, things haven't gone as planned and I need to tell you what I've discovered." He took a deep breath. 5 years ago, Howard approached me about a partnership. His commercial properties needed someone to manage the antique timepieces, many of them featured, and my reputation had caught his attention. I was flattered, and the financial arrangement seemed beneficial for both of us. Dad ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. At first everything seemed fine, but 6 months ago I noticed discrepancies in our accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. I've spent the last few months quietly investigating, and what I've found is disturbing. He leaned closer to the camera. Howard has been systematically embezzling from our partnership. I've documented evidence of nearly $850,000 diverted to offshore accounts over 5 years. Tomorrow I plan to confront him and dissolve our partnership. I've already spoken with Grace Winters about legal representation. Grace, I remembered her. Dad's friend and attorney for many years. The documentation on this drive proves everything, Dad continued. If anything happens to me, take it to Grace. She'll know what to do. He paused, emotion briefly overtaking him. I'm sorry to burden you with this, sweetheart. I should have been more careful about who I trusted. The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence. Howard, my stepfather, had been stealing from my father for years, and Dad had planned to confront him the day before he died. I spent the next several hours methodically going through every file on the drive. Dad had been thorough. Spreadsheets showed the original transactions and how Howard had altered them. Email correspondence revealed Howard's growing desperation, as various investment properties faced foreclosure information he'd hidden from everyone, including my mother. But what made my blood run cold was a scanned document dated 6 months before my father's death. A life insurance policy Howard had taken out on my father, naming himself as the beneficiary. The amount $2 million. That alone wasn't proof of anything sinister. Business partners often had insurance policies on each other, but combined with everything else. I dug deeper and found a folder labeled Medical. Inside were my father's recent health records he must have requested copies of. His cardiologist's notes from just 2 weeks before his death indicated his condition was stable and well managed with current medication regimen. His heart attack shouldn't have happened. As the pieces fell into place, nausea swept over me. Could Howard have had something to do with my father's death? It seemed unthinkable, yet the evidence was mounting. Another folder contained information about Tyler's business ventures, all spectacular failures. A juice bar that closed after 3 months. A clothing line that never made it past the design phase. A tech startup that burned through $500,000 with nothing to show for it. And each time Howard had bailed him out, putting increasing strain on his own finances. The latest venture, the grocery app Tyler was promoting in that photo, had already cost Howard over $200,000, according to the investment documents Dad had somehow obtained. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Selling Dad's watch was never about the money. $15,000 was nothing compared to what Tyler regularly burned through. It was about destroying evidence. Somehow they must have discovered or suspected the hidden compartment. I sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. My father might have been murdered. The watch that could help prove it was in a pawnshop. And I had 72 hours to figure out what to do before it potentially disappeared forever. One thing was clear: I needed to be careful. If Howard was willing to steal from his business partner, possibly even contributing to his death, what would he do if he knew I had this information? I copied all the files to my laptop and a second backup drive I kept in my desk. Then I hid the original microdrive in a small lockbox inside my closet. Tomorrow, I would confront my mother and Howard, but carefully. I wouldn't reveal what I knew about the evidence, just the watch itself. Their reactions might tell me more than any file could. I barely slept that night, my mind cycling through everything I'd learned. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called my mother, trying to keep my voice casual as I asked if we could have dinner that evening. "Oh, Dana, what a lovely surprise," Mom said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Howard's been saying we should check in on you. Why don't you come to the house? Tyler's here too. We could make it a family dinner." The word family stung, but I agreed. Perfect, all three of them together. The Blackwell house sat on Lake Washington, a sprawling modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private dock. As I drove through the security gates, I reminded myself to stay calm, to reveal only what was necessary. Mom greeted me at the door with a too-tight hug and air kisses that never quite touched my cheeks. At 58, Linda Parker Blackwell remained, Striking her blonde hair expensively highlighted her slim figure maintained by private trainers and careful dieting. "Darling, you look exhausted," she said, ushering me inside. "Are they working you too hard at that hospital?" "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, following her into the vast open-concept living area where Howard and Tyler were having drinks. Howard rose when he saw me all practice charm and confidence. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in casual designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Dana, what a pleasant surprise." His handshake was firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Can I get you something to drink, wine cocktail?" "Just water, thanks. I needed a clear head." Tyler barely glanced up from his phone, offering a distracted hey before returning to his scrolling. At 30, he was a younger version of Howard. Same confident posture, same sense of entitlement, but with a perpetual air of boredom. We moved to the dining room where a housekeeper served an elaborate meal I barely tasted. The conversation flowed around me, Howard talking about a new property development, Mom describing her latest charity committee meeting, Tyler occasionally interjecting with updates on his app's progress. I waited until dessert was served before saying I've been going through some of Dad's things. A brief silence fell. Mom set down her dessert fork. "Oh, I thought you'd finished with all that months ago." I nodded. Most of it. But I keep thinking about his Rolex, the one that was supposed to be buried with him. Howard immediately reached for his wine glass. As Linda explained, we sold it to help with the medical expenses. James would have understood. "That's interesting," I said, keeping my voice level, because I could have sworn I saw it on Tyler's wrist at his launch party. There was a photo on Instagram. Tyler's head snapped up, eyes suddenly alert. "What?" "No, that was my watch. Howard got it for me for my birthday." "Really?" "Because it looked exactly like Dad's. Right down to the scratch on the bracelet." Mom jumped in, her voice high and brittle. "Dana, what are you implying, that we stole your father's watch? That's absurd." I turned to her, letting some of my anger show. "Is it because the watch that was supposed to be buried with Dad, the one possession he treasured most mysteriously, disappeared? Then you claim you sold it for medical bills he didn't have, and now Tyler has an identical watch." Howard set down his glass, all pretense of charm vanishing. "That's enough, Dana. I understand you're still grieving, but these accusations are out of line." "Then explain to me," I pressed, "why Dad's Rolex was pawned yesterday at Golden Gate Pawn and Jewelry." The stunned silence confirmed everything. Tyler paled visibly. "How did you—" "The owner called me," I said, watching their reactions carefully. Apparently he knew Dad professionally and recognized the watch. Mom looked at Howard, panic in her eyes. Howard's jaw tightened. "Tyler," he said in a dangerous voice. "What did you do?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "I needed some cash for the app launch, just temporary. I was going to buy it back next month when we get the first round of investor funding." "You pawned James's watch," Mom whispered, apparently shocked. "But you said—" "I said I'd take care of it," Howard cut in sharply. The dynamics in the room had shifted. Mom seemed genuinely surprised while Howard was calculating, controlled. Tyler just looked trapped. "It wasn't yours to take in the first place," I said firmly. "Dad wanted me to have that watch. You stole it before the funeral." Mom at least had the grace to look ashamed. "Dana, it wasn't like that. James owed Howard money from their business dealings. The watch was compensation." "Compensation," I repeated incredulously. "That watch was supposed to be my inheritance. The one thing Dad wanted me to have to remember him by. And you took it to fund Tyler's business scheme." Tyler suddenly found his voice. "Look, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't know it was that important. I just borrowed it for the launch to look successful. Perception is everything in the startup world." "Borrowed it. You pawned it for $15,000. Howard stood abruptly. "I think that's enough discussion for tonight. Tyler made a mistake, but we'll rectify it. I'll retrieve the watch tomorrow." "No," I said, standing as well. "I'll get it myself. It's rightfully mine." Howard's eyes narrowed. As Linda mentioned, there were financial arrangements between James and me. The watch was part of settling those accounts. What arrangements, I demanded. Because from what I understand, Dad's business was doing well. He didn't need your money. A tense silence followed. Howard stared at me assessingly, as if trying to determine how much I really knew. "Business is complicated, Dana," he finally said. "Your father made some poor decisions toward the end. I covered significant losses for him. The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. But I couldn't reveal I knew the truth not yet. I don't believe you, I said simply, and I'm getting that watch back. I turned to leave, but Mom caught my arm. Dana, please. We're family. Can't we put this unpleasantness behind us? I looked at her, this woman who had abandoned Dad and me, who had chosen wealth and status over family once before, and was now complicit in stealing the one thing he wanted me to have. We're not family, I said quietly. We stopped being family when you chose them over us. I walked out, ignoring her calls behind me. In the car, my hands shook so badly I could barely start the engine. Their reactions had told me everything I needed to know. Tyler had taken the watch, but Howard was orchestrating things behind the scenes, and Mom was either willfully blind or actively participating. Either way, I needed to act fast. Howard would almost certainly try to get the watch back now to destroy the evidence once and for all. And I had no doubt he had the means to pressure Sam Walker into giving it up 72-hour hold or not. I needed help, and I knew exactly where to start. Early the next morning, I called Grace Winters, my father's attorney. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral, but I remembered Dad mentioning her in the video. If anyone would know what to do, it would be her. Grace agreed to meet me at her downtown office within the hour. At 62, she had the sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades navigating the legal system. Her handshake was firm, her assessment of me immediate. "You look like James," she said, simply gesturing for me to sit. "What can I do for you, Dana?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The missing watch, the pawnshop, the hidden microdrive, and the evidence suggesting Howard had been embezzling from my father. I showed her copies of the files on my laptop, including the video Dad had recorded. Grace's expression remained neutral, but I noticed her fingers tightening on her desk as she watched the video. James came to see me, she confirmed when it ended. 3 days before he died. He said he had evidence of financial impropriety and wanted to discuss his options. We scheduled a follow-up meeting, but he died before we could have it. She looked at me directly. I always thought the timing was suspicious. Could Howard have had something to do with Dad's death? I asked the question that had been haunting me since I discovered the files. Grace considered carefully before answering. "The evidence you have shows motive. The life insurance policy is particularly troubling, but we'd need more to prove anything criminal regarding his death. The medical records show his heart condition was stable," I pointed out. "The doctor even notes that he was responding well to his medication." "That's a place to start." Grace agreed. "We should speak with his doctor." 2 hours later, we were sitting in the office of Dr. Marcus Peterson, my father's cardiologist for the past 8 years. He was a thoughtful man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, clearly disturbed by our questions. "Yes, James had a congenital heart condition," Dr. Peterson confirmed, "but it was well managed with medication. His last checkup showed no cause for concern." "Could his condition have deteriorated suddenly, without warning?" Grace asked. Dr. Peterson frowned. "It's possible, but unlikely given his stable history. The autopsy showed a massive cardiac event consistent with his condition, but..." He hesitated. But what I pressed. I was surprised by the severity, he admitted. With his medication regimen, even if he had an episode, it shouldn't have been catastrophic. He looked at us curiously. "May I ask why you're investigating this now?" Grace and I exchanged glances. "We have reason to believe there might be more to the story," she said carefully. Dr. Peterson's expression grew serious. "In that case, you might want to look at his medication. The autopsy report mentioned therapeutic levels of his prescribed drugs, but I'd be interested to know if he was actually taking them as directed in that final week." It was the opening we needed. With a medical release form that Grace had prepared, we gained access to my father's prescription records from his regular pharmacy. What we found sent a chill down my spine. "The formulation changed," I said, comparing the records. 1 week before he died, his regular prescription was refilled, but the generic manufacturer was different. Dr. Peterson examined the records. "This manufacturer has had quality control issues in the past. It's possible the medication wasn't properly dosed." He looked up gravely. "It wouldn't necessarily show up in a standard toxicology report, especially if no one was looking for it." "Who picked up this refill?" Grace asked. "The pharmacy records showed it wasn't my father, but a family member whose signature was illegible." "We need to take this to the police," I said as we left the medical building. Grace nodded. I have a contact in the detective division, Laura Simmons. She specializes in financial crimes, but she'll understand the implications here. Detective Simmons met us at Grace's office later that afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with shrewd eyes and a direct manner that I immediately appreciated. "Let me be clear," she said after we'd presented our evidence. "What you have definitely warrants investigation. The embezzlement claims are solid, and the life insurance policy raises red flags. The medication issue is concerning, but proving deliberate tampering will be difficult." "What about the watch?" I asked. "It contains the original microdrive with all the evidence." "That would strengthen the case considerably," Detective Simmons agreed. "Can you get it?" I explained the situation with the pawnshop and the $15,000 loan. "I can try to get a court order," Detective Simmons said, "but that will take time. And if Blackwell has the connections you say he does, he might move faster than we can." I need to buy the watch back, I decided. Today. The problem was I didn't have $15,000. My savings account held just under $5,000, and my credit cards were already stretched from paying for Dad's funeral expenses. After Detective Simmons left promising to start looking into Howard's finances, I called the one person I thought might be able to help Alicia Morgan, my childhood friend who had become a successful real estate agent. Alicia met me at a coffee shop near her office, her concern evident as soon as she saw my face. "Dana, what's going on? You sounded frantic on the phone." I gave her the condensed version, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock to determination. "How much can you put together?" she asked when I finished. "About 5,000, I admitted. Maybe 6 if I max out my credit cards." Alicia thought for a moment. "I just closed a big sale. I can lend you 8,000. That still leaves you short, though." "I know," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I'm trying to think of what else I could sell quickly." "Your car," Alicia suggested gently. My 7-year-old Toyota wasn't worth much, but I could probably get 4,000 or 5,000 from a dealership that day. It would mean relying on public transportation for the foreseeable future, but if it meant getting Dad's watch back and potentially proving what happened to him, I'll do it, I decided. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sold my car to a used car dealership for $4,500, emptied my savings account, and accepted Alicia's loan. By 5 o'clock, I had collected $14,500, still $500 short, but I hoped Sam might be willing to work with me. As the sun began to set, I called Sam to let him know I was coming with the money. His response chilled me to the bone. "I'm sorry, Miss Parker," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Someone already claimed the watch." "What do you mean someone claimed it?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. "You promised to hold it for 72 hours. "I know," Sam replied, genuine remorse in his voice. "But the gentleman who came in, he had connections. Mentioned his relationship with the police commissioner and the banking board that oversees pawn licensing. Howard. It had to be. He paid $20,000 in cash," Sam continued. 20% over the loan amount. Legally, I couldn't refuse. I felt sick. After everything, the evidence, selling my car, borrowing money, I'd still lost. The watch was gone, and with it the original evidence of Howard's crimes. "I'm truly sorry," Sam said. "If it helps, I may have something for you. Could you come to the shop anyway?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Sam's back office, trying to hold back tears of frustration. But what Sam showed me next rekindled my hope. "I've been in this business a long time," he said, sliding a USB drive across his desk. "I've learned to be cautious. When I found that hidden compartment, I made copies of everything before putting it back together." I stared at him in disbelief. "You copied the microdrive," he nodded, "and photographed the note and the watch mechanism itself. I documented everything, date, time, the condition when it came in, proper chain of evidence just in case." Relief flooded through me. "Sam, you have no idea what this means." "I think I do," he said gravely. "When a man modifies a Rolex to hide information, then dies unexpectedly and his business partner threatens a pawnshop owner to retrieve it, that tells me something very wrong is happening." He hesitated. "There's something else. The man who came for the watch, he wasn't interested in the watch itself. He asked specifically if I'd found anything inside it." My blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "That it was in perfect working condition, with no unusual features," Sam replied. He seemed satisfied, but I don't think he believed me entirely. He took the watch, but he was more interested in making sure I hadn't seen what was hidden inside. I clutched the USB drive. Thank you, truly. Sam shrugged modestly. Your father was respected in our professional community. If something happened to him, he deserves justice. I left the pawn shop with renewed determination. The original watch was gone, but the evidence remained. I immediately called Grace and Detective Simmons to update them. This is still valuable, Detective Simmons assured me over speakerphone. The pawnbroker's testimony about the hidden compartment and his documentation will support the authenticity of the copies. And the fact that Blackwell was so eager to recover the watch adds weight to our case. We agreed to meet early the next morning to formalize a statement and begin official proceedings. Grace offered to let me stay at her house, but I declined, wanting just to go home and process everything that had happened. It was nearly 9 when I finally reached my apartment building. As I approached my door, a sense of unease crept over me. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. My door looked untouched, but something felt wrong. I inserted my key with caution, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. The devastation inside stole my breath. My apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied onto the floor, books pulled from shelves. Even the refrigerator had been searched, its contents spilled across the kitchen floor. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing. This wasn't a random burglary. This was someone looking for something specific, the microdrive, the evidence. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call Detective Simmons, only to have it buzz with an incoming text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or next time we won't just search your place. Tyler. So he was actively involved, not just a pawn in Howard's schemes. I backed away from my door and ran down the stairs, suddenly afraid to be anywhere near my apartment. In the lobby, I called Detective Simmons, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. Don't go back inside, she instructed firmly. Go somewhere safe, a friend's house, a hotel somewhere. They won't look for you. Don't use credit cards if you can avoid it. I'll send a team to your apartment right away. I called Alicia, who immediately offered her guest room. Stay as long as you need, she insisted. I have a security system and live in a doorman building. You'll be safe here. That night, lying in Alicia's guest bedroom, I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Howard and Tyler had gone from stealing my father's watch to threatening me directly. Whatever was in those files, whatever my father had discovered, was clearly worth risking everything to hide. Morning brought a call from Detective Simmons. We've processed your apartment, she reported. They were thorough, but didn't find what they were looking for, I assume. No, I confirmed. I have the copies with me. I hadn't let the USB drive out of my sight. Good. We've got enough now to get search warrants for both Howard's home office and his business premises. The break-in at your apartment escalates this considerably. 3 hours later, I watched from Detective Simmons' unmarked car as police officers entered Howard's lakefront home, warrant in hand. Mom's horrified face was visible through the windows, Howard standing rigidly beside her. What happens now? I asked. We search for the watch and any evidence related to the embezzlement or the medication tampering, Detective Simmons explained. If we find enough, we'll bring them in for questioning. The wait was excruciating. 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3. Finally, Detective Simmons' phone rang. Simmons, she answered crisply. You found what? Bring it in immediately. She hung up and turned to me with grim satisfaction. They found fragments of a watch in the fireplace, partially melted and broken apart. He tried to destroy it, but there's enough left to identify it as a Rolex matching your father's. My heart sank. He destroyed the watch. Which only strengthens our case, Detective Simmons pointed out. Why destroy it unless there was something to hide? They also found financial records in his office safe that corroborate the embezzlement claims. And most damning of all, they found text messages on Howard's phone to someone named Marcus Jenkins. The name was vaguely familiar. He worked at Dad's shop for a few months last year, I remembered. Dad had to let him go for repeated absences. Well, it seems Howard rehired him for a special job, Detective Simmons said. The messages aren't explicit, but they discuss picking up a prescription and making a substitution that no one will notice. They reference your father by name. Hope and grief tangled in my chest. We might actually prove what happened to Dad, but the watch, his beloved Rolex that he wanted me to have, was gone forever. Detective Simmons squeezed my shoulder. We're bringing them both in, Howard and Tyler. Given the new evidence, we should be able to hold them while we build the case. I nodded, watching as officers led Howard from the house in handcuffs, Tyler following shortly after. Mom stood in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and horror. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She might have been complicit in taking the watch, but I doubted she knew the full extent of Howard's crimes. She had been manipulated, too, in her own way. As if sensing my thoughts, Detective Simmons said quietly, "We'll need to question your mother as well. Her involvement isn't clear yet." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Whatever happened next, nothing would bring back my father or undo the damage that had been done. But perhaps finally there would be justice. I spent the night at Alicia's again, too emotionally drained to think about finding a new apartment yet. The next morning brought news that Howard and Tyler had been formally charged. Howard with embezzlement, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Tyler as an accessory after the fact. "What about the medication tampering?" I asked Detective Simmons when she called with the update. "What about Dad's death?" "We're still building that case," she said carefully. "It's more complicated to prove, but Marcus Jenkins is cooperating in exchange for leniency. He's admitted to switching your father's medication at Howard's request, though he claims he didn't know it would cause harm. It was something, at least. A confirmation of what I'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to believe." Later that day, Grace called. "Your mother is at my office," she said without preamble. "She wants to talk to you." I hesitated, torn between anger and curiosity. "What about—" "She says she has information about the watch and Howard's involvement in your father's death. I think you should hear her out." An hour later, I sat across from my mother in Grace's conference room. Mom looked like she'd aged years overnight. Her carefully maintained appearance, now disheveled, her eyes, red-rimmed from crying. "Dana," she began, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he was planning." "What did you know?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Howard told me James had agreed to sell the watch to help Tyler's business. He said it was a gesture of goodwill to mend fences between them." She looked up, her eyes pleading. I believed him. When he asked me to remove it from the funeral home, I thought I was honoring an agreement. "And you didn't think to ask me. Dad told me specifically the watch was meant for me." Mom flinched. "I should have. I was so caught up in Howard's world and his version of things." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I've told the police everything. How Howard pressured me to help get the watch. How nervous he was when you mentioned the pawn shop. How he came home yesterday with the watch and destroyed it in the fireplace, saying it was contaminated evidence. Did you know he was stealing from Dad's business?" She shook her head. "Howard kept me isolated from his business dealings. He said it was to protect me." A bitter laugh escaped her. I was so blind. "And Dad's death. Did you suspect anything?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "No. God, no. But looking back, Howard was so calm when James died. He took care of everything, managed all the arrangements. I thought he was being supportive, but now—" Her voice broke. "I keep thinking about how relieved he seemed, how quickly he moved to settle the business affairs." I studied her, searching for signs of deception. All I saw was grief and regret. "I've filed for divorce," she said quietly, "and I've agreed to testify against Howard. It won't bring James back, but it's the only way I can try to make amends." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 months later. In the intervening time, the evidence continued to mount. Marcus Jenkins provided detailed testimony about Howard's instructions to substitute my father's medication with an improperly dosed generic that would cause a severe cardiac reaction. Phone records confirmed numerous calls between Howard and Jenkins in the week before my father's death. The financial evidence was equally damning. With search warrants giving them access to Howard's offshore accounts, investigators documented the full extent of his embezzlement, over $900,000 over 5 years. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of Howard's mounting financial troubles. Despite his outward display of wealth, he had been leveraged to the breaking point, using new investments to cover losses from failed ventures, many of them Tyler's disastrous business attempts. My father's life insurance payout had been the only thing keeping him solvent. On the day of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom watching as Howard and Tyler entered in handcuffs. Howard still maintained his arrogant bearing, but Tyler looked broken, unable to meet anyone's eyes. To everyone's surprise, both men accepted plea deals rather than proceed to trial. Howard pleaded guilty to embezzlement, destruction of evidence, and negligent homicide, a lesser charge than the murder that had been contemplated. Tyler pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact. In exchange for their cooperation in recovering the embezzled funds, Howard received 15 years and Tyler 5. Mom testified as promised, her voice steady, as she recounted Howard's manipulation and the events surrounding the watch. When she finished, she looked directly at me from the witness stand, her eyes filled with remorse. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a step towards something like understanding. In the end, the court ordered substantial restitution from Howard's estate. As my father's only heir, I received a settlement that included the embezzled funds plus damages. It was more money than I'd ever expected to have, but its origin made it bittersweet. 2 weeks after the hearing, I made a decision. Using part of the settlement, I reopened my father's watch shop. The little storefront had been sitting empty since his death, but with Sam Walker's help, he agreed to come on as a partner. We breathed new life into it. James Parker and daughter Fine Timepieces read the new sign above the door. Inside, the familiar wall of clocks welcomed customers with their synchronized ticking. Sam began teaching me the watchmaking trade. I had my father's steady hands, he said, and an eye for detail. In the front window, I placed a framed photograph of Dad holding his beloved Rolex on the day he bought it. Beside it, in a velvet display case, sat a perfect replica that Sam had helped me commission from Switzerland. But this watch held a special modification, a hidden compartment in the back, just like my father's. Inside, I placed a tiny handwritten note. Asterisk time reveals all truths. Craftsmanship endures. Justice prevails. Asterisk. It had been exactly 1 year since that fateful call from Sam Walker about my father's pawned Rolex. The watch itself was gone, destroyed in Howard's desperate attempt to hide his crimes. But what it contained, the truth my father had so carefully preserved, had survived. As I locked up the shop on the anniversary of that day, I ran my fingers over the new Rolex on my wrist. It wasn't the same as having Dad's original watch, but it carried the same spirit, a symbol of precision, dedication, and the unstoppable passage of time that eventually brings all truths to light. Sometimes I think about Mom now living in a small apartment and trying to rebuild her life. We meet occasionally for coffee, our conversations stilted but gradually thawing. The betrayal still stings, but I'm learning that forgiveness isn't a single moment but a process, much like the intricate mechanisms of a fine watch, each tiny part moving in sequence to mark the passage of time. And in the quiet moments when I'm alone in the shop, surrounded by the gentle ticking that was the soundtrack of my father's life, I sometimes feel him there, proud of the justice we achieved together and the legacy that continues. Through my hands. Have you ever had to fight for justice when it seemed impossible? Or discovered that something precious you thought was lost forever had actually left you an unexpected gift? Comment below with your experiences. And if this story moved, you please like, subscribe, and share with someone who appreciates tales of truth prevailing against all odds. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to seek justice even when the path seems darkest.